Okay, so earlier we were talking about like peer pressure, talking about high school. You're a high school pastor. This next question says, clicked on it wrong. Do you recommend public or a private school? You're already laughing.
Depends on the day. That's one of the things that you really need to pray about. I will be honest and say they both have their pros and cons. Going to a public school, the pros are obviously the simplicity that you have of being able to teach your kids the word. So my kids come to Calvary Christian School, and they have chapel, and they have Bible, and they're learning verses, and they have teachers that love Jesus. They have teachers that are praying for them. They have teachers that hold them accountable, a principal that holds them accountable, and just a wonderful Christian environment. We are just so blessed that our kids get to go to Calvary Christian School. At the same time, you can be kind of, what's the word? When you're overwhelmed with, flooded. Anyway, you can. The thing about going, because I do both. I'm involved in Liberty Christian School, Calvary Christian School, and then also Kennewick High School and Summit Kamiakin too. And I love the ministry that I get to have at the public school, that I get to be a light there. So you can be at a Christian school where all you are is with Christians, and you get all the wonderful elements except for the element of being in the world and the light that you get to be there. There are opportunities. We're starting, if you're interested in putting your kids in Calvary Christian School, we're starting a soccer team. Little plug there.
So who's the coach of this soccer team?
Yeah. So sign up for soccer at Calvary Christian School. So we get to go and play some other schools, and we get to be a witness and things like that. They do a track meet, but walking through the hallways of a Christian school is a wonderful blessing and a wonderful, cool opportunity. But it doesn't afford the same thing that you get when you go to a public school, and having to really, it's a different element, of being a light in a fallen, in a dark world. We have wonderful Christian teachers at our public schools. They're doing a terrific job out there. I know that the laws and rules make it extremely difficult for them, but they're doing wonderful work in our public schools. And so it's one of those things that I would sincerely just pray about. Is the question, do I have a preference? Or
No, what do you recommend?
What do I recommend? I recommend you pray about it. For me, our first inclination with our little kids, because we've done high school for so many years, I enjoy the public high schools, but we saw the importance of our kids being in elementary school specifically, that is just surrounded with teachers that are going to teach our kids the word, show them Jesus, pray for them. And the way that the world is going now with the inclusion of, I'm just going to say it, the transgender and the gender identity, and there's a lot of political correctness that are being put into kids in schools these days, that on certain elements I think kids need to be prepared for, but starting your kids off in an elementary school, even going into junior high is great too, is wonderful foundation. I would, if I were to err, I would err on a private education in the elementary levels. I would, to get them, you train the child in the way they should go, and they shall not soon depart from it. And so if I were to err, I would err going that way. There certainly is the issue of what can you afford. Obviously, Christian schools, private schools are going to cost money,
right?
And that's just the way that it is. If I couldn't afford for my kids to go to a private school, and I had to sign them up into a public school, We have some wonderful people in our church that teach at public schools, elementary schools. Shout out to Jamie and Katie Lamberson, that do terrific work. And so what it would just mean is that I have to be more involved. And so as a parent, so I would try to get myself involved as much as possible, knowing the teacher, knowing the curriculum, knowing the principal, knowing the counselors, and what's going on in my kids' lives. I would just have to be uber involved. And
which is a good thing anyway.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing.
So let me ask you this on the stuff that you said, because I look at what you said about being able to, if you're in the public school system, be a witness, which is what we're training our kids to be, right? We want them to go out and...
It's one of the pros, I think, for being involved in public school.
Yeah. And I look at, like Daniel, 16 years old, and he's standing up to the king at that time saying, give me vegetables, I ain't going to eat your meat. And he's praying when he's not supposed to pray and all this stuff. So he's a leader, right? So do you look at the kid specifically and go, okay, and we talked about this peer pressure thing earlier. He can handle the peer pressure. He has a leadership ability in the sense of he cares what the Lord thinks more. Put him into the public school and let him be a light versus he's not ready yet. Maybe he's a follower. He's caving to peer pressure.
Yeah.
If I have the money, Christian school, yeah or nay?
You bring up a good point in the sense of there's the issue of the kid himself or herself as well. And so I've got 3 kids, and if I could only afford one to go, I have one in mind. I won't say who it is, that I would want going to Calvary Christian School, and then the other 2. I think could handle themselves a little bit better in the public sector, and so that's a great consideration, a factor, a variable to consider in this whole thing is the kid himself. Some kids just need if they go to a public school, you're setting them up to fail, right? And so I put that into perspective too. Something else that you said.
Well, I mean, just to finish that thought is like I kind of look at what your mom said to you when you became a pastor because she knows what they're getting in for. I look at the public school system as a parent. In fact, I was just talking to another brother about this, another pastor, and his wife's involved in counseling in the public schools. And she got invited from the high school kids this year to a number of weddings. 3 of them were homosexual weddings. And I look at that going, that was never not a temptation. That was never a trial or a situation when I was going through high school. And I look at what high school kids are dealing with nowadays, and it's like I'm throwing my kid into the lion's den, and I'm like, no, kind of like your mom was. But the flip side of being a parent is that, listen, I don't want them sitting in a pew. I want them on fire for the Lord and going and doing damage. So it is kind of a tough thing.
Well, the thing that we take into consideration, I'll just kind of do a shout out to children's ministry here. It's also something that we do in both our youth ministries. When I came on staff here, Steve had told me that my job is to prepare these kids for the world so that when they get into the world, they're not going to get slammed, right? And so I've sat in on children's ministry classes because my kids go there, so I sit in on a class. And we have a lot of kids that are in the public school system because they're coming here. 1, they come here and they hear the word of God, and 2, the parents that are raising them, they know how to answer questions like evolution. They know how to answer questions like marriage and the definition of marriage and relationships and those types of things. And we are preparing them for the world, right? In the sense that this is what you're going to get hit with. And so I don't want to send my kids, if my kids are going to go to a public school, I want to do the best I can to prepare them for what they're going to see, what they're going to hear, and how to argue it, debate it, to stand on truth, to not cave. And we've got kids all my kids, most of my kids in my youth group are public school kids, and they're going to class. In fact, I just had a kid who's going to a college right now. He called me and he was asking me for my help on defending the reliability of Scripture because he was given a speech for it. And so these kids, they're not at least kids in our youth group and in our ministry. They're not just surviving the public sector, they're thriving in it and they're making a difference.
So cool.
Because,
That's cool.
yeah, and so that's how I would be treating it too. You know, sometimes the best defense is a good offense.
Yes.
And so you need to go out there and you need to be a light, and here's the way that you defend yourselves. And they're going to get hit, and they do. And, you know, because they've been prepared for it, it's just like, bring it, you know. And
Shield,
really
full armor of God.
Yeah, a lot of these kids were really proud of the stands that they're taking, either on Facebook or in their classroom themselves. I remember I had a kid years ago. In fact, I was just talking to the junior high at chapel about it, but I had a kid about 15 years ago that was in my youth group. He wrote a paper on, if you remember the big issue about 15 years ago in the science world, global warming, right? Mm-hmm. So he wrote a paper on global warming and how it wasn't true. Got an F on it. And the teacher was agenda driven that way and was telling him that he doesn't know what he's talking about. And here we are 15 years later, and he was proved right.
Yeah.
Right? And so
especially in the Tri-Cities this year.
That F still stands.
Yeah.
Right? But they, you know, so we got kids that if you're training your kids for that, and that's really what you know, what we need to be doing is preparing them for what they're going to get hit on, and not sending them into the lions unarmed, right? And so,
amen.